I just wanted to welcome everyone officially to our Collegian 135th anniversary event this morning and panel. Really excited about this. I don't think you could pick a better topic than coverage of the football team over the last 135 years, interwoven with the history of the Daily Collegian. So we're excited, and I won't steal any thunder from our panelists. I did want to say thank you to Mike Porman for setting this up for us, and the Belisario College of Communications, Dean Harden and company for breakfast and for welcoming us here. And thanks to members of the Collegian AIG board who are here and some who are not here for making this happen. Really appreciate all the hard work to pull this off. I'm going to hand to Megan Swift just to introduce herself and talk about quick logistics on the Belisario Media Center tour that we're going to do after this for anyone interested. And then we'll hand over to our still awake, even though they were filing at 2 a.m. moderator and panelists to dig in. Megan?
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Swift. I am the current editor-in-chief here at the Daily Collegian. I know I've met a lot of you, so it's really nice to see you all here. Excited to talk to you even more afterward. So like he was saying, we're going to do a tour of the Media Center if you're interested. So I was thinking we can meet here in this little corner after the panel's over. Myself and one or two of the other Belisario Media Center tour guides will be here to take you around the building, and then some of our staff members will be in and out of the office upstairs for meetings and such today if you want to hang around, chat with people. But yeah, thanks so much, and I will pass it over to Seth.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for being here. I'm Seth Engel, football reporter with the Collegian currently. Thanks for all being here so early, white out night before. Also thank you to our panelists for making it. Some introductions. We have John Black, who's to my left here, 1962 Penn State grad. He pretty much did it all with the Daily Collegian, from sports editor to editor-in-chief, before authoring the football letter from 1976 until his retirement in 2021. So thank you, John. Next to him we have Max Ralph, who's currently the football editor for the Collegian. He's a junior studying broadcast journalism and he minors in sports studies. And then next to him we have Mark Wogenrich, a Penn State grad from 1990. He's currently the editor and publisher of All Penn State, site of Penn State News on Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Network. So thank you so much, guys. Just to start things out, I think it's really interesting. All three of you joined the Collegian at very different times. Penn State football was in very different states when each of you started. If you could just go down briefly and describe, what was the state of the program when you first started covering the beat?
Well, thank you, Seth. Well, first of all, we were playing in Beaver Stadium, which was up here right next to the Nittany Lion Shrine. We're a Kern building, and the Nittany Lion Inn parking deck currently reside. The soccer stadium, the soccer stadium was just behind the east stands, as was the baseball stadium. My God, what it was a grass field with a few bleachers. Both the baseball field and the soccer field. So the varsity baseball and soccer teams played outside of the east stands of what was then New Beaver Field, because it was new when it had been moved there in 1930 from over behind Osmond Lab. But Penn State was an Eastern power, playing teams throughout the Northeast. Pitt and Syracuse were our two biggest opponents, West Virginia next, and even Penn back in the earlier years, but by my time that had faded out, the Penn rivalry. Although we did still play a couple games against teams like Colgate and other smaller colleges in the Northeast. But it was I guess the highlight was in 1959. Ernie Davis was the star running back for Syracuse. They were undefeated when they came into Beaver Field, and that's when we got more press coverage than I had ever seen before, up in the press box, but it still didn't fill the old press box, which today is only the middle section of the current press box or the current stadium. But Roger Kaufman ran back in an opening kickoff, 100 yards for a touchdown. We still wound up losing the game by 2 points. But at any rate, Penn State was emerging as a Eastern power under Rip Engel, who was the coach at that time. This was about 6 years before Joe Paterno became head coach. So, as I say, we were renowned in the East. We played for the, what was the name of the trophy now? The Eastern Lambert Trophy. The Lambert Trophy. It was a big deal if we won the Lambert Trophy. So it was a lot different from what it is today. The stadium, the enrollment at Penn State, overall, we had about 14,000 undergraduates and a couple thousand graduate students. So total enrollment was, I think, less than 19,000, which of course is less than half of what it is today. So that's kind of the status that I saw, and compare to what it is today as a national powerhouse, one competing for the college football playoffs now to get the national title. Up until not too many years ago, of course, it was all determined by the vote of the media and the coaches. But I'll pass this on, and other guys can talk about what it's like on their venue. Maybe I should go to Mark first. Since he can pick you up around the late 80s and the 90s, and then come back to you young guys.
Thank you, John. And it's really a pleasure for me to be here with the current Collegian crew, because this place kind of really got me started and helped make me, and I cannot believe this facility. I was in the first Collegian class to go to James Building. And when Mike Corman told me that James Building got knocked down, that's like the Rathskeller closing. I saw a Collegian tweet when the Rathskeller closed, and I darn near cried. So those were two really formative places for me, the James Building and the Rathskeller. So now that they're not here, it kind of makes me a little wistful. I started covering Penn State football in 1988. Was my first year. I was a freshman in 1986 when they won the national championship. I wasn't up here on campus for the parade. I think it happened in January before classes had restarted. I didn't get up in time. So I'm young and excited, and oh my gosh, Penn State football now is this huge thing. 1988 was the first losing season they had since 1938. I'm 5-6 that year, and whole season was a mess. But that time was kind of I think that time was the transition period, among the transition periods for Penn State football, coming out of the 80s and getting into a period where they were not as really necessarily as relevant until rebuilding the relevancy again in the 90s. There was always this circular notion about Penn State football back then. You were going to compete every 4 years. That's the way there was this general philosophy about it, and you can't get away with that sort of thing, anymore. I restarted covering Penn State then in 1999 when they had an absolutely brilliant football team that lost to Minnesota on a late field goal, and that kind of started the tumble into the early 2000s. So I seem to get to Penn State football at just the right time of coming out of great periods and then struggling into the next phase. The whole constant, though, for me on the Collegian is just the way everything, it changed, you know, covering Penn State football as a college student changed the way I look at, I think, athletics in particular. For you guys, it's got to be completely different now because of what athletics has become. And so I'm really curious to see how much you consider covering football to be your job. Because I consider it now 30%, 40% of my job, essentially, with everything else that goes on with a $160 million athletic department that employs, you know, sports psychologists and accountants and lawyers and medical staff and media, social media people, that is not only in a strategic communication sense, which is what they call their department, that not only that used to work with us, that was their primary job, was to work with the media. Now they compete with us because they have access to the best content. They have access to practice, they have access to the locker room, they have access to Eli Manning coming through the tunnel. All the things that we can't see, they can deliver to you. So you're competing not only with other media, but you're competing with the program you cover. And that structural change to me has not gone unnoticed. And I was wondering, you know, I don't know if we get into that, but how you guys consider that to be part of your job too.
Yeah, I think that's a really I think this is a really interesting point, and really what I was going to talk about as far as how different the program is now compared to where it had been is just the amount of pressure that is like surrounding athletics as a whole. But first off, it's special to be up here, and especially with two guys who really we're walking in their footsteps. I think I speak for Seth and I both. This is both of our second year being able to do this, and it's really special to be able to share this place and the memories that we're making on the beat, just because of the things that guys like these two did before us. But yeah, the difference is just how much pressure there is on athletics as a whole. I mean, Penn State is a major university, but without its football team, what is it really at this point? It's one of the highest revenue generating areas on campus, period, not just in athletics, and it extends to everything. I mean, this past summer we had to cover a major media rights deal with the Big Ten, and it's like those kinds of things you didn't really think a whole lot about 20 years ago, and now it is the entire driving force behind some of the decisions Penn State and the Big Ten makes as a whole. And Mark mentioned the social media and the competing with your own athletic department of the team you cover. There's just so much more that goes into not only the football team itself, but our coverage of the football team that I would have never thought of just watching as a fan 10 years ago when I was a little kid. We've gotten here, we cover recruiting, we cover, like I said, the media rights, there's just random things. We cover the players that are in the NFL. They do something fun, we tweet it from our main account because it has to breed engagement somehow. It's a lot different from just the football team. The football team matters, but there's so much more that goes on outside of Saturdays. And that was just kind of a culture shock when you compare it to, you know, what we grew up knowing sports as to what they've really become now.
Can I just add on to that? One thing that really bothers me is that today football, primarily, and sports in general, have become a major business. They're not sports, not the true sports anymore in my mind. The staff that you're talking about now in sports, the athletic department, communications, there was one sports information director when I was a student here. Anything we got about the team that was disseminated to the media came from that one sports information director. The Mark lamented James building being torn down because he was with the first group of collegians that established their office in the James building. Well, I was there we had the basement of Carnegie Building. It was all the Collegian office, business staff and sports staff, photo staff and news staff. And we went, I was several iterations before Mark, because we moved from there into the basement of the north wing of Sackett Building. At that time, a new wing. It was added on at the same time that the massive 2-block long Hammond Building was built. And we had no windows down there. At least you had windows at James Building. We were down in the basement.
I do remember the Carnegie basement.
You remember the Carnegie base? Well, yeah, but hey, they needed some room for faculty up there, so they kicked out the Collegian. They moved us down there for a couple of years before, well, it was quite a number of years before they went on to James Building. So there have been several iterations of the Daily Collegian through the years, and it's still the same student staff that's out there doing their best and learning a lot of things that will prepare them for their careers later.
Nice, guys. I think it's really interesting, you know, you all mentioned kind of how different it is to cover the sport of football than it was even 10 years ago. I mean, technology is obviously a huge part of our lives today, but it's also completely changed the way that you can report on a sport. And all of you have, you know, joined the beat at different times. So I'm just wondering, you know, how has technological advances, how has that changed the way that you cover sports?
You at least had some technology. I didn't have any.
You know, I in kind of expecting this question, one thing I thought about, there was one tool that I never thought I would go to cover something without, and that was a reporter's notebook. I mean, I could never have imagined going to cover a high school football game. I mean, I've covered fires, I've gone to police incidents, I've gone to school board meetings, with a reporter's notebook. And if I don't have one now, it's okay. So I can't even imagine, like, what is going to be next, like the phone. I mean, obviously, this is my tool now. So for anybody in the Collegian now, or anybody who's working now and looking forward, think about that tool that you use. It's probably going to be the phone. This is going to be obsolete. It's going to be a reporter's notebook in, I don't know how long, 20 years, 25 years. So there's going to be something else that somebody, when you're on a panel 20 years from now, you're going to say, I used to use a phone, and now that, my brain implant thing, we didn't have those, or, like the neural network that I just got updated. I got 3.0 version of my neural network or something like that. We did not have that. The virtual game, the virtual Beaver Stadium that you're going to be able to, with an Oculus and go to a game literally go to a game in your living room. I mean, I've talked to people they're working on doing something like that at Meta and at other places. This technology is absolutely unbelievable. Just as an aside, I covered, in 2005, I covered the Super Bowl. It was the Eagles versus New England in Jacksonville. That was billed as the first wireless Super Bowl ever. And that, in my lifetime, that doesn't feel like that long ago. Really doesn't to me, but, it is. But that was billed as the first wireless Super Bowl. That was the first time at the Super Bowl the media center had Wi-Fi. Now, that you can't go pretty much anywhere without using Wi-Fi, or in some cases, you don't even need it anymore. But at that point, it was revolutionary. And the newspaper I worked at the time, we sent like 7 or 8 people to the Super Bowl. I was the only one who could access the Wi-Fi because I had bought what was called a Wi-Fi card that you inserted into the laptop. Everybody else was using either an Ethernet cord or couplers, back in the day. I mean, I've sent stories from a bar using phone couplers. I covered a high school game. I'm really getting off topic. Use the high school game. You would attach couplers to a landline, and you had an old Radio Shack computer that it would transmit to back to the office. And I had a bartender say, "What are you doing?" And I was a stupid kid, and I said, "I'm with the FBI." he didn't buy it, but so like the way the way you use social is incomprehensible to me, and that's a good thing because I can't comprehend using social media, the multiple platforms, the way you use it, and how you use it, and what the need is. That's something that I have to learn constantly. The need, excuse me, the need for using social media. Whereas for you, for you, it's an accepted practice. It's ingratiated now, which is good. So I would say, look at whatever is coming next, familiarize yourself with it, because I use two social media platforms. You probably use what, 5? Yeah. Right. And I couldn't possibly, couldn't possibly want to do that. But with engagement, I will see ridiculous videos being retweeted, getting 300,000-400,000 views. And I'll tweet a video last night and it gets 260 views. So, and I'm conscious of that sort of thing where I don't want to be, but I have to be. And that's just generationally. That's just my view of that I don't want to be conscious of that, but it has to be. So be conscious of what is next. Take your phone and think that is not going to be what I'm going to use in 20 years, because I don't know who takes a reporter's notebook anywhere where you go.
Yeah,
Well, let me just, sorry.
To add to that, the only tool that we had in my day was a pencil and a notepad. And that's all we used, and that's all I used till I stopped grading the football at. And then you get back to the office, or maybe your home base, and bang it out on a typewriter. And that was a big deal, being able to do that. And I remember the press box having the only, quote, tool that we had up there was one landline telephone that the AP reporter got first shot at using to dial in and call in with his story to the Associated Press, because I was going to hit the wires first. And that was the total. And again, when we were in the basement of Carnegie, that was room for all of the editorial staff, the business staff, the news staff, and had a dark room where the photographers had to go in there and, develop their film in the acid baths and print their photos on print photo paper, and so that was the extent of technology used 60 years ago when we were there.
Okay.
yeah. I mean, I think
And that was less than half of the lifetime of Daily Collegian. I mean, at that point, we were already past half of 135 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just the best way to compare it to what we're doing now. I mean, the competition used to be how quickly you can get your game story on the page, and now, how many of you didn't know that Penn State won within 5 minutes of the game ending last night? Mark mentioned how we use our social media. We have 3 platforms that we post immediate content to between Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and constant content throughout the night. Yes, TikTok as well, but our game coverage isn't. We haven't really expanded our game coverage to TikTok yet, but we should, because that is a ridiculously fast-growing network that I choose not to partake in. But,
Your detriment, and I will say that it's mine too, but it is to our detriment.
it most definitely is. Yeah,
I thought YouTube was ridiculous 15 years ago.
yeah, I hate TikTok, but people are making careers off of TikTok, so it whatever. But that's the thing, is like what I've done. What I do when I'm in the press box has even evolved from what I did last year in the press box. There is it's the plain truth is that the Collegian took a long time to kind of lean into social media content and the way that the world works right now. And so last year we handled things a lot differently, and now this year, most of my job on a game day as our football editor isn't the print product anymore. I spend 90% of the game looking for ways to breed interaction on our Twitter page. I encourage you all to scroll through and see the work we did last night, because I think it's pretty good. But like there was a point in time. Penn State threw a touchdown last night, and 10 minutes after it happened, I had photos emailed to me from our photographers directly from the sidelines, and I downloaded those photos and tweeted them right away. And they got, I mean, a couple, like probably, I didn't check the numbers, but they probably got tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 views. And like those are the kinds of things that there's such a premium on quick. Like you have to get that out there, and that's the difference between the competition these days. Is it used to be how quickly can you get something on a page, how quickly can you get this story written. Now it's not even about the story anymore. It's about people just need content. I mean, we breathe it. It's like it's our breakfast in the morning. We want to see videos of what Penn State did last night and how many touchdowns Sean Clifford threw. It's hard, honestly, for me, because I didn't even have a Twitter account before I joined the Collegian as a freshman. And now it's like, it's my most used app on my phone. It takes up my screen time for about 7 hours a day. But that might be an exaggeration, but.
My friend Steve is sitting back there. Hi, Steve. When we were on the Collegian together, we covered a bowl game in San Diego our senior year. We went to Tijuana, right? That was fun. We had, I mean, they will work, Collegian, you know, people in the Collegian, you know this, you are working from a game until 10 p.m., 2 a.m., whatever it is, it's constant. We covered a bowl game in San Diego, and we did not publish again for 2 weeks after that game. I went to Las Vegas. I had 2 weeks to write a story from a bowl game. By the time the Collegian published, that game was 2 weeks old. Can you, I mean, you know, that is beyond lifetimes, I mean, anymore. And I just, you know, so I had 2 weeks to mull this, you know, this fascinating, you know, thread weave that I was going to do about this unbelievable football game. And that was just the generation that we had, and I can't even fathom having that kind of time. I would love to have that, to be able to mull a thought. And I think that's part of a little bit of the problem, is that we don't give ourselves that time to do that anymore because of engagement, which is obviously important. But, so I still look at that a bit wistfully, a bit longingly in those days when I could, maybe not 2 weeks, but at least have a day to process what happened in a football game, and then to be able to write, you know, a compelling, readable story about it, because written content still is very popular. My traffic will tell me that with certain things. But it needs a companion driver, and that is definitely social.
Trying to think of the craziest places that I've like tweeted a piece of news information, or even just I post our stories to our websites as the editor and use our CMS. Like I'm pretty sure I've posted news stories from a golf course before. Like I can't go anywhere without my computer, because I never know when I'm going to need it. Like anything can just happen at the drop of a hat, and it's insane. Because like Mark said, we want time to mull our writing and everything too, but like we have to do that at the same time we're all trying to build a social media brand, and Seth does a great job of it, better than anybody else our age. That's the bottom line. But yeah, it's just crazy how involved it all is.
Appreciate the sentiment there, Max. We talk about technology and how it's changed, you know, covering breaking news. There isn't a piece of breaking news that stands out more in the history of Penn State football than the Jerry Sandusky case. I'm wondering, from each of your perspectives, what was it like to cover that? And have you noticed a change in availability that Penn State will give you, you know, since that case broke?
For me, at that time, writing the football letter, I had to be conscious of everything taking place here at that game against Nebraska, the first game we played after everything had broken, and being careful not to jump ahead and not to make suppositions that you didn't know what was true at that point and what was not, and to realize that with the football letter, at least, the reputation of the university was right out there. I was very concerned about and had to try to treat it with care and give the view that most alumni had, who had, to a lot of people, Jerry was something of an icon for running the Second Mile program and the things that they did to benefit underprivileged kids, and that's what I think it was just extremely, it was the most difficult piece I had ever written, and followed up with article in the Penn State magazine and that sort of thing. So that's all, I guess, the memory that I'm still left with is how careful you had to be and just what you said, what was established as fact and what yet was not established, and what the implications were, but be sensitive to the serious nature of the whole thing. I'll pass it on.
So I was here for that week. I was one of those degenerates standing outside Joe Paterno's house, getting stuff thrown at us, basically, by fans. I was downtown when a news van attempted to get flipped. There was a real sense of like a little bit of unease, but then I think that was more crowd related than panic related. Then I literally walked up to the Old Main lawn, and there were just kids sitting quietly in prayer circles with candles, and that was a couple hundred yards away from College Avenue. It was a really amazing scene. My most vivid memory, though, I don't know if the audio will play. I still have audio from this. Penn State went to a bowl game that year called the Ticket City Bowl. They didn't want to go. They didn't want to play in this game. It's played in Dallas, and they had voted. I don't know, people, if you've read, there's a book by John Bacon. I can't remember the title of it. Like I think the subtitle was The Soul of College Football. And he had interviewed some Penn State players who were on that team who said they didn't want to go to that bowl game. They'd had enough of that season after Joe Paterno had been fired and all the upheaval that they nearly came to blows essentially with their athletic director in a team meeting about going to that game. So we're in Dallas, we're covering this game. And at bowls they have team functions. They'll bring players to theme parks, or they do like hospital visits. They entertain players pretty well. You get wine and dine at these bowl games. So they brought the Penn State team to this honky-tonk bar called Gillies in Dallas. Told us that we could come, the media could come, there would be some availability, and we would be able to talk with the athletic director at the time, their interim athletic director, Dave Joyner. And he would give us an update on the coaching search and the program, all this sort of thing. So we get to Gillies, and it's a country bar. There's a mechanical bull. Players are eating barbecue. They didn't let us eat. It looked really good. In the back of the room, they make the athletic director available to us for like 10 minutes. And this is a really kind of sober, really pivotal point in Penn State football history at that moment, because the NCAA had written a letter to Penn State saying, we're going to investigate this. There could be sanctions. He was looking for the next football coach. The team did not want to be there. The current staff didn't know what was going to happen with them. They were in a really kind of distressed place too. There was a lot of tension around this. And in this atmosphere, the athletic director is going to provide the media with an update on what's going on. Meanwhile, a hypnotist is on stage hypnotizing football players. This was the entertainment for the night. I'm gonna try. I still have the audio. This audio is like 12 years old. You know, this is from, December 29th, 2011. I can't believe I still have this audio.
His college experience here as an assistant or a head coach.
It certainly is a consideration, but not necessarily the defining factor. It's certainly a desirable thing.
Did you say you were actually reading some of the rumors?
Oh, no.
So, I don't know if you can hear that. In the background, there's a hypnotist hypnotizing football players. And we're standing there at this point going, what is happening right now that we're doing a media availability at the most the most critical juncture of this football program while players are getting hypnotized. That would never be allowed to happen under this current coaching staff. In 100 million years, would this athletic department, coaching staff, and communications department allow something like that to happen? Because they, the way they kind of manage media, I think right now, lack of a better term. That situation, for me, just crystallized the whole, 3 months of just mania that was that period in Penn State football.
I mean, I didn't cover the event. I was hardly even alive. I barely even remember that time of my life. I was literally 10 years old. But I think to the point you finished on there is that just the controlling that there is from the strategic communications team, and it goes back to the point you made earlier, where as beat reporters, we're competing with the program that we cover. Just to contextualize this, and I do think this is probably a change from events like the Sandusky case in the way that the people we get to talk to each week are handpicked, and the information department is trying to control the stories that we write about each week. I know I was talking about it with Seth and a couple of other people on the beat. Every week there is, without fail, on a road trip, there is a kid that we get to talk to during the week who is from the state that we are going to. Because without fail, especially Maryland, because there's 20 kids every year from Maryland, but without fail, you get that because that is the storyline that the StratCom team would rather you push rather than anything that has to do with a loss to Michigan or anything. So yeah, I really do think that is a direct correlation to events like that, and the way that the storylines that we are given are so very controlled and made concrete in the way that we are supposed to tell them. And it's on us to do everything we can to work around that. But like I said, I'm really tired of getting the kids from Maryland every time Penn State goes to Maryland.
Just regarding, it was interesting about access. Currently, the current program is incredibly consistent about access, and they maintain a really good structure. You know you're going to get players on a certain day. You're going to get coaches. You know things are going to happen. They've been incredible. They've been very good about that. Previously, I've been looking back under Joe Paterno and under their old media staff, there was a lot of wild cards that would be involved. I mean, we went to Michigan a couple of times, and Joe Paterno said no players. No post-game player interviews. They had just lost really tough games. If anybody remembers the 2005 football game, I'll say 2 seconds, we're added to that clock. No players after that game. He didn't want players to be, he wanted to be the voice. He didn't want players to come in and say something that they might regret, or he might regret. So in that sense, it's interesting. But I will say, I haven't had the unguarded moments and the more unique moments with players that I used to have under that, back then in a different media environment. There's at the Outback Bowl, there's a day called Outback Bowl Beach Day. Take everybody to Clearwater Beach, both teams go. And they do, they have events and stuff like that. And the one Outback Bowl we were at, the media relations person at the time said, just to interview interview whoever you want. I don't care. 100 players are at the beach. They want to talk. If you want to interview them, go ahead. So we were interviewing freshmen. I mean, again, in 100 million years, that would not happen. I mean, if you could have just free reign to the entire roster on a beach, it would blow your mind, I would imagine,
We
right?
were on the same beach this past January.
Right.
That did not happen. I mean, literally, Penn State went to the Outback Bowl this last year. That was not a
Yeah, I did not go to beach day because I knew that wasn't going to be like it was. I've interviewed a player again at the Orange Bowl. I interviewed a player. They had another beach day, and I stood there for 30 minutes, talking to a local player for me on the beach because everybody had left. He's like, I don't care what you do. There were more, I think, more unguarded moments, but there was also much less consistent. At least now, you know what you are going to have, and they're very consistent about it. They meet expectations. They don't leave you hanging. Another stupid story. I was on my honeymoon in the 2005 season. My wife and I were in Hawaii, and there was the day of their bowl media day. I got a call from their sports information director at the time. It was 5 o'clock in the morning in Hawaii, saying, Mark, I just want to let you know that no players are going to be available today. People were driving. This is an hour before media day started. And I said, thank you. I'm in Hawaii. I don't care. Again, you wouldn't see that today. There would not be just the cancellation of a player availability like that an hour before. They're pretty good about at least maintaining those. I would say they're very good about that. But to the flip side of that is they're very good about maintaining schedules and staying on consistent message. So you don't get to know the players, I don't think, as well as maybe some we were able to used to do. But at least you're going to have consistent access to them. That's one thing I do appreciate that.
Let me just say that availability of players, the first year that I was writing the football there, after a game, Joe Paterno would come outside of the locker room and talk for 5 or 10 minutes with the press, and then, okay, locker room's open. They opened the doors. Everybody walked in, walked around, and you interviewed anybody you wanted to. On your own, you had access to every player in the locker room who was interested and willing to talk. And then that quickly changed when we started getting female reporters covering football. Up until that time, there were no female reporters in the press box. There was only one restroom. Of course, it was for men. They had to build shortly, in a year or two thereafter, they had to build a women's restroom in the press box to accommodate the females covering football. And same thing at after games, they would only bring players out to talk to the assembled media. You didn't have open access to the locker room.
Thanks, guys. I think we'll open it up to questions now from the audience. If you could raise your hand and then say your name, grad year, and then what your role was with the Collegian, that'd be awesome.
Hi, I'm Liz Kahn. I graduated in 1985, and I was one of the first females to cover the football team. In the couple years before me. But the access question is so fascinating to me because I was one of those people who stood outside the locker room and waited for the players to come out.
I think as Mark was saying, we have such a good schedule with everything. We know we get players after every game, but I don't experience that emotion when I'm covering a game whatsoever. We typically wait. What do we think it was last night? Probably a half hour at least after the game ended that James Franklin even stepped into the media room. And then players roll in after his 20-minute press conference. There's no such thing as emotion. The players are already showered and in their post-game travel suits before we even get to see them. There is no such thing as emotion, and that's part of why the social media aspect is so important, as you said, because the only way that we can breed that engagement is through real-time happenings, through videos on the broadcast, through us tweeting about what an atmosphere is like in Beaver Stadium, because we just don't get that raw feeling when we are actually doing our jobs anymore.
Kudos to you, by the way. Congratulations. Because I came in just after that. And for me, locker rooms have always been closed. And Penn State has always closed their locker room unless they've been mandated to open it by outside agencies. The college football playoff mandates certain bowl games have to open locker rooms. The Orange Bowl had a locker room mandate in the 2006 Orange Bowl. They had an open locker room mandate. Joe closed it, and there were national reporters losing their minds, like outside the locker. Absolute, and we're going. This was not really new to us because we didn't have an open locker room. But I remember a couple of national people, like big names still to this day, losing their minds about not being able to go into the locker room. I think they got fined for it, actually. Joe might have got fined like $50,000 or something for that. The only times really I've been in a locker room was at the Rose Bowl, the 2017 Rose Bowl, because again, that was a bowl regulation that the college football playoff mandates you open those locker rooms post-game. And that was palpable. That was absolutely, Trace McSorley, who was at the game last night, was in tears because of the interception he threw. And I'd never seen players that unguarded on that team because we get them in structured environments 20 to 30 minutes after. Usually you're supposed to get a 10 to 15 minute cooling off period, and State extends that a little bit. And I think part of it is because James Franklin has other media. He's got in-house media that he's contractually obligated to do, the radio network, their in-house staff, and then they will do in-house media as well. And then they also get a cooling off period. And part of that is to make some of the social media content that they will send out. The locker room dance videos, things like that, the stuff that really, I think, resonates with a lot of fans to see happy football players enjoying a win. Part of it, I think that they give them that bit of extended time. So when they come to us, as Seth said, they come to us, or Max said, they come to us kind of almost humanized again, really. Just essentially kind of back into a normal state. And that works after losses because it gives them time to compose. But after wins, you do. You kind of crave that environment that you can be able to tell a story from them being incredibly happy. Like Parker Washington last night should have been happier. At some point he was, I'm sure, catching his first touchdown pass of the season. But when we got to him, he was just happy. And I think it does diminish a bit of that element that you can't share.
I kind of want to add on to that as well before we move on to another question. Last night we don't get the immediate player availabilities. So what we will do after games, because we were allowed on the field with 5 minutes left in the fourth, I'll walk around and just videotape everything I see. And I think Auburn was one of the first real, true signs of emotion that I saw covering the beat, where you had Marquise Wilson doing backflips and players dancing all over the field. I mean, that was true emotion, and we don't get that type of availability today. So we literally have to take out our phones and follow James Franklin as he high-fives all the recruits, high-fives all the fans, and then that's our big content, which will get more clicks than any article we put out, and any other tweet that we put out, you know, for the rest of the day. So I think that's interesting. Yep.
Me?
Yep.
Okay. Shannon Simcox, I graduated in 2011. I did a bunch of stuff for the news department. But I'm wondering how much of this lack of emotion also just comes from the nature of, like we're talking about social media, and people, I think almost all of your average people are just very aware when you're talking to anyone, but definitely to media, that anything that you say can and will be put online later. So, can we talk a little bit about that element to what you guys, how that has evolved since, you know, you can just go into a locker room and people probably care less about that aspect of things to today when you know that anything that comes out of your mouth might be on YouTube.
That's a good point.
Obviously, I mean, my response is going to be different from the other folks because I've never recorded anything in the locker room or the press conference. I mean, I don't even carry a recorder. I just carried my pencil and pad and took notes. But I've never put anything out on social media. I don't even follow social media at all, personally. I simply had to write a printed piece that was going to come out several days later when it was printed. Eventually we got online just about 10 years ago, and then it had to be out Monday morning. But it was still nothing immediate after the game, and nothing that was going onto any social media platform. So only these two guys over here can talk to that.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is that players are able to create their own narrative. I mean, you're basically nothing in the sports world anymore if you don't have a verified social media account or you don't have 1,000+ followers somewhere. So they have the ability to go start a live stream on Instagram and take fans into the locker room and go on Twitter and say, man, that win felt good. But they have the ability to control their own narrative, so why would they want us doing that? The thing is, there's some level of media training for players that's given by the strategic communication staff. I don't know exactly what it is, but there is always a specific type of response you will get from players and coaches, depending on the questions you ask. It's actually like kind of an impressive dance for everybody on the beat these days. We literally talk about it after a practice or a game, like, oh, I think I phrased that question well, to try and get a response out of somebody, because you have to work so hard to frame it in a way that they won't give you a robotic response. It's, oh, we just want to go 1-0 this week. It's, oh, I'm really proud of my teammate. It's not the actual substance of what happened in the game. It's just not what it is. That's not what they're trained to say, because Penn State has its own social media following as an athletics department. Players have their own social media followings. They can control their own narrative, so why would they want us to do it for them?
I was at a bar in my hometown on the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. And a football player was there from the hometown, a kid who I really like him. I'm still like kind of, stay in touch with him today. He came in too. And he was there with some of his friends. And I just joked with him, don't do anything tonight that I have to write about. 2.5 hours later, he was getting thrown out of the bar for starting a fight. So, what is my responsibility in that venue? This is, there was really nothing, there was no police report filed. I didn't have a cell phone or a cell phone camera, so I couldn't take video of him like getting into it with a bouncer saying, get off me, that sort of thing. But I was standing there watching the whole thing. And my instinct is I really don't have a story to write here, because it's just a kid getting thrown out of a bar. The only difference is that he's a football player at Penn State. Anybody else who gets thrown out of this bar is really not a story unless it becomes, there's a police report and there becomes something substantial to report on. He now has to worry about, the current players now have to worry about that. They have to be cognizant of that if they get thrown out of a bar, an apartment, a fraternity, whatever, that there are going to be people there with cell phones that can capture and decontextualize that experience or that incident. So what is all of our collective, reporting on this? Where's our responsibility end? Or start with a story with a college student who doesn't live a life anywhere near what a college student does, no matter what they tell you. They don't live college student lives. They live completely different lives than anybody else. And that's been the case for 50 years. Going back to John's day in the 50s. College football players probably got away with more in the 50s than they do now. So I think we have a responsibility in that sense that it's just not what that video represents of a football player getting thrown out of a bar. If it goes viral, that's great for us because we get the engagement. But what truly ask yourself, what does that video truly represent? What is the news value of that particular incident at that time? I had no way to write a story about it because it was just a guy at a bar, ultimately when it comes down to that. So that's I think I still have that in the back of my mind and that I will ask that. So if I am on College Avenue last night at 3 a.m. and I see a bunch of football players, I'm not going to pull out I'm not going to pull out my phone. Other people might, and that's just choices that you make after the Big Ten title game. We were at a fast food place in downtown Indy at 4 a.m. and about a dozen football players came in, and phones came out. Other people, the place was packed, and people's phones came out. And I sat there and I thought, in a way, I felt bad for them because that fishbowl-ish kind of thing, I don't know if it should necessarily follow them. It does, and they know it, so they train for it. And Penn State, James Franklin and his media staff train them incredibly well for it, but they still have to live in an absolutely, they live in a different environment. And there's positives, there's incredible benefits to that, no doubt about it, but there's drawbacks.
Wanted to ask about a business-related question, which has to deal with the stadium itself. There's been talk about expanding it. It's all, as we all know, it was built in 1960. And you see leaking pipes periodically. It needs to be fixed, obviously. So from a business standpoint, I think that's an important thing for the university to at least address. I don't know where it stands or whether you have any insights in terms of how much what are they going to do with the stadium and how much it's going to cost? I've heard prices of $500 million, $1.5 billion for a new facility there.
Was that your first time feeling this way last night?
We felt it last year.
We had it last year too. So
The press box is going to come down at some point. It is going to fall. As if they don't do something to it. Because I guess it's got to pass some sort of regulation, right? It's structural. It's got to be. There has to be some sort of structural integrity to it. But that thing, at the minimum, that box needs to be buttressed a little bit. Interesting that you bring that up because Northwestern just announced a new privately funded stadium, about 40,000 seats. I think it might even be lower than that. Their estimated cost is $800 million. And that's going to be privately funded. So you're looking at $1.5 billion for a new stadium. I think a new facility. And I would suggest that Penn State doesn't want a new football stadium. Penn State wants to put that money into the athletic department. They want to be able to fund facilities that benefit athletes. New football stadium doesn't benefit the athletes. It has really it's of no consequence to the football team itself. They go in their locker room, they play in the field, they get overwhelmed by the people, and they go back to their locker room, change, and they go back. They want better dorms. They want better housing facilities for football players. They want better housing facilities for all the athletes, but in particular football players. They would spend $1 billion, I think, on a condo tower for athletes that would be 3-bedroom palace suites instead of spending $1 billion, $1.5 billion on a stadium. But ultimately, I think they're going to do it. Personally, I think they're going to build a new stadium. I couldn't possibly tell you what a timeline is because I think they're going to look at downsizing. That's the way, I think that's the way attendance athletics is going. It's just you want to satisfy fewer people in better ways. I would think they want to keep it 6 figures because that's still a very high recruiting number, and it's still a very positive number to say that you get 100,000. But there's a diminishing return on a football stadium when you can invest that money actually in building your athletic department.
John, if you care to comment on it, I know we talked before this about, the complete transition of Beaver Stadium from behind the Nittany Lion Shrine to obviously what it is now, if you want to comment on that.
It's just how the whole sports programs have changed and how radically different they are today than 60 years ago when we played in a 30,000 all-steel structure up by the Lion Shrine to today's 107,000.
Stadium, where, what
The other million
people,
who are seeing the game on television can witness. It's just hard to explain, hard to fathom. I would hate to be an athletic director today and have to make the decisions with the amounts of money involved. I mean, I thought it was a hell of a price to pay, $93 million the last time they added the suites and the club seats and the upper tier on the south end of the stadium. But that's peanuts compared to what would have to be done today simply to upgrade facilities for the wealthy folks who can afford more plush seating and accommodations and amenities in today's football stadiums. I can't fathom what it might be. I'm too old at this point, too few years less in life to worry about it, frankly.